Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt,
And I'm Eric.
and we are here celebrating a diverse set of a couple of interesting movies that came out to end the month of June. Very excited about the two movies that we have that are coming out that are ending this final weekend of the first half of 2024. Couple of different films. One that's the third chapter in kind of an existing franchise, and one that is meant to be the first chapter in what Kevin Costner hopes is going to end up being a four-film franchise. Two kind of very different approaches here. We will kick things off with A Quiet Place Day One. And this one is the third entry in the Quiet Place franchise. This one takes the action all the way back to the outbreak of this world that was set up so beautifully back in 2000, and I think it was 2019 was the first one. Uh, John Krasinski making that centered on basically a family that gets dropped into a scenario where they're in the middle of a world where they have to be very quiet or else monsters will grab them. This one takes us not only back to as that outbreak starts, but takes us to, as it notes in the beginning, one of the noisiest places on earth, which is New York City, where at the outside it tells you the average day in New York, the average minute creates 90 decibels, which is the equivalent of a sustained scream. And I thought that was really cool. We get dropped in and meet some new characters as well. We're introduced to Sam, played by Lupita Nyong'o, who is in a facility where she's being cared for, struggling with an illness, kind of a little standoffish toward the people, a little bit more open to her main caregiver, played by Alex Wolff. But she has this cat that is her emotional support cat and her best friend. She agrees to take a trip into New York City on the promise that she's going to get pizza. They're going to see a show. Turns out to be a marionette show. And Eric, I just have to say, if I got lured into a bloodbath that was beginning of the end of the world because somebody wanted me to see a marionette show, I would be incredibly disappointed. It's not long after they're there that everything kind of goes off the rails. The attack begins, and people are left scrambling, figuring it out. Among the people we're introduced to are Jaimin Hansu, who plays kind of a father whose family is also at this show, and then Joseph Quinn, who plays Eric, who is a law student from England, who's just kind of one of the stunned survivors trying to make their way to freedom. I don't want to give away a lot of the plot details because a lot of that is really about the journey of this film. You know, by now you kind of have an idea of what A Quiet Place world is. I was curious. This is the first one of this franchise that moves away from the central characters like Emily Blunt. This one, even though John Krasinski worked with Michael Sarnowski on the story, Sarnowski created the script and directed it. He had previously directed the film Pig, if you ever saw that one with Nicolas Cage. Kind of that was a movie that was more interesting and better than I thought it was going to be. And you know what? A Quiet Place Day One really blew me away. I loved the emotional richness. I am giving it one thumb up. I loved the performances. I loved the connection between, particularly between Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn. And the cat. The cat plays such a crucial central role. And it just all really works well, telling this beautiful personal story in the midst of chaos. You know, they don't, and showing kind of how this all takes place and gets started in a new setting, very self contained. I think the way it's set up, I don't necessarily know if we would continue with this group of people, and I really wouldn't want to. This A Quiet Place, I kind of thought it's interesting. When the first one came out, I thought it was great. I was like, I never need to see a sequel to this. It was a very beautiful, self-contained, emotional story. But both of the sequels we've gotten have managed to be really good, in my opinion, at telling a different kind of a story, but bringing out that emotional richness. That was the part that really worked for me with the first one. In that case, it was particularly a father daughter, and some of the scenes with Emily Blunt. And this one, totally different characters, a totally different world, but the rich emotional core and the experience remain the same for me. I love this one a lot. I vaulted it up into my top 5 of the year so far.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I was incredibly emotionally invested in this. That I had no right to be as good as it was, but yeah, I guess kind of it does, because it is interesting that every installment in this franchise seems to be this like carefully cared about emotional passion project when the concept is so out there. Yeah, Lupita Nyong'o, Joseph Quinn, and the cat in the movie, the name is Frodo. It wasn't until a certain point in the movie that my wife pointed out that Joseph Quinn was having panic attacks, and that was part of the reason he was struggling in like certain points in the movie, and also why the cat would have identified him and found him out. And it just, I don't know, the sweet kind of nature of the story. It scene in the jazz club, and when they're screaming in the rain, and like it's so nice to watch a movie that for some reason there'd be this expectation for it to be this monster creature feature thing, and there's plenty of that in the movie, but that's very much not like the point. And I kind of love the idea of a world that had to go completely quiet, and what is really important to you, and a lot of what they talk about in this. And the only issue I have with this movie is something that I was really looking forward to watching this movie specifically for, is finally having characters in the movie acknowledge that the characters who freak out, who like yell like, oh, we're all gonna die, and yell like, help me, and like and are doing all this, those are the characters that are like shut down, and they are moved and removed. And it's really satisfying in a way to see it. There's this heart-wrenching scene where Jimon Hanzo has to quiet this person, and he sees his son, and he knows everyone is, and this person is just refusing for like 30 seconds to a minute to stop trying to scream, despite already have survived the initial wave and knowing that that is what is going to cause people to die. And he does what he does, and it's an awful thing to do, but it's like, I've watched so many horror movies where their characters are like and they can't, like, they're hyperventilating and they're screaming, and like it's this thing where it's like it's really rough to watch someone struggle. And so it was kind of nice to just, I don't know, the story about the survivors of that versus the guy who sees someone under a car and is like, help me, person underneath of a car, and just starts screaming, help me. Like, it doesn't, but
well, you counter those kind of people even in your jobs and in life in small ways, that there are people that are good under pressure, and there are people that literally come apart under pressure. And I think that's, the focus of these kind of movies do show you a little bit, especially here at the outbreak. And, often you get that in natural disaster movies, the people that are, but it feels true to life. They're just terrible in pressure.
Yeah. That's the morbidly interesting thing about it, is I think sometimes watching a movie that's about the people who can keep it together and survive gives you this intrinsic way to root for them. And so it's like instantly, as soon as I see that a character exists in this world, I'm interested in them, and I want to know what they're going to do, because for some reason they're the kind of person who figured this out and survived. They're automatically on some level smart and competent and have self-control, and like there's a certain I don't know, like there's a certain thing. Like, I also shout out Alex Wolff. He gets such a brief time in this movie, but he's incredible. I think
but in a way he actually has career. Yeah, in a way, he almost has a little bit of an easier time being able to develop a character arc because his part of the movie is before the outbreak when he can actually talk and they have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
rapport. What I was blown away with is by the time Joseph Quinn connects with Lupita Nyong'o, they're in the middle of quiet times, and they find
yeah,
places like underwater where they can have minor conversations, but so much of their relationship gets conveyed through facial expressions and word dialogueless, um,
yeah.
and it's they don't even have. To me, I was marveling at it even more because in the first two movies, even though you don't have a lot of audible dialogue because you have a character that's deaf, a lot of sign language is happening and you are seeing the words and the emotional intensity pass back and forth. And in here, it just so much of it is just
Mhm.
looks or nonverbal cues because neither of them is a deaf individual. They're not using sign language. They sparingly write on paper. When she has that notebook, I thought, oh, they're just going to start writing everything, but they really use that
No.
sparingly, and so I
Yeah.
thought that was an artful decision.
Yeah, like having a whole comedic beat with absolutely no music cues or anything, where she's horrified that something is walking up behind her while she's reading books, and she has to invoke relief that it's not a monster, and it is all just completely silent. Like it's so well done. I know Lupita Nyong'o is a great actress, but I did not know beyond Stranger Things, which he's very likable in Stranger Things, that Joseph Quinn was this big of a heavy hitter, and I'm so excited for him to do more stuff.
Well, I was going to say it makes me between this and another season of The Bear being out this weekend, I'm getting a little more excited about Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph Quinn obviously can be Johnny Storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
one solid thumb up for me. Sure.
So let's talk about that. I mentioned this is the third part in this franchise. The first two, both directed by John Krasinski, focusing on this central family. John Krasinski and Emily Blunt are in the first one. Emily Blunt and the kids in the second one. Where would you put Day One? I'll say for me, the original Quiet Place is actually one of my favorite films of all time. If you saw my countdown of my top 50 favorite films from
Mm.
a couple of years ago, it had just made it in. It's been a couple of years. We've added more things, so it might be just a touch out for me of top 50. But I loved it, and I thought the second one was good despite my trepidation. But I actually think I like A Quiet Place One a little bit more than A Quiet Place Part Two, even though I think all three of them are very solid.
Yeah, I haven't seen part two, but one is outstanding. But honestly, because of the setting, and also just it's hard to say because of the story without trying to get into it scene by scene. I feel like I could do an hour long talk about like the character's choice to just be going for pizza and how she says that, I immediately set up in my head like, oh, what's actually up there? Is it family she's trying to connect to? What really is the goal? But no,
They really
no,
paid it off, though, I thought.
yeah, it was great. Like it just the magic show, like I could talk about forever. Like there's so many standout moments that mean something about human nature and human connection that I feel like this is going to be my number one. But I'd have to rewatch A Quiet Place because I haven't watched it in a while. I remember that movie hit hard and balanced tension and monster scares
Yeah.
with emotional connection the same kind of way that this balances those. So.
To me, like when I think of the first A Quiet Place, that final scene between John Krasinski and his daughter, the message he signs to her, and what he's going to do. They all, they capture that a little bit in Day One.
Yep.
Fortunately, it doesn't do exactly the same thing because that was, when they started that, I was like, I don't
Yeah.
know how I feel about just kind
Oh,
of doing the same.
but the final shot of Day One,
Mhm.
whoa, like, mm,
But that felt, they made an ending that was their own. What I was looking for is not. Sometimes in these franchises, particularly in horror films, you get a lot of repetition of hey, this worked really well in this movie, so let's do it again with the slightly different characters. And I
Yeah.
was glad that they didn't exactly do the same thing, because there was a lot of originality to me in day one, which is probably the part that I was curious about. You know, how do you inject a sense of newness and originality? And we're on the last day of the first half of the year, and so far I have been really impressed by the variation and quality we've gotten in the horror genre so far this year. Because already in the first 6 months, we've gotten A Quiet Place day one, we got Abigail, which was a
Mhm.
very sharply written, very intriguing film, you know in a violent nature, if you were looking for like straight carnage. We got Lisa Frankenstein, which I would drop in there, Late Night with the Devil, which was a
Mhm.
very curious and interesting. The First Omen, Immaculate. Those are a little bit of a different kind of film, and there are a ton. It feels like this is going to end up being a big year for the horror genre, because if you're looking like next week, one of the big releases we'll be covering is a horror movie, and there are a lot. I noted when I was at A Quiet Place. I don't know if you saw the trailers, but almost every trailer for in our showing was a horror movie that's coming out in the
Smile
next
too.
few. Smile, yeah, I'm less excited about that. Although the trailer made me more excited than the idea of having a sequel. But even like Alien Romulus looks like a
Mhm.
real throwback to the original Alien. That trailer
Yeah.
gives real throwback vibes. So that could end up being like a huge genre that we look back on for 2024.
Yeah, the last weekend of the year is Nosferatu.
Hmm.
Like that's yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even the way that they're doing the new version of The Crow looks like it's. I know that doesn't make you happy, but Cuckoo is coming out in August too,
Mhm.
with Dan Stevens and Hunter Schafer.
Blink Twice movie.
Blink
Like
Twice, yeah. I mean, there's quite a few. I feel like there's another one that I'm forgetting about from October, but it's it's going to be interesting.
yeah.
Well, from
Long Legs.
yeah, Long Legs. That one's actually in July. That gave me the trailer I watched. That gave me serious Silence of the Lambs vibes, which
Yeah.
in a good way. Um, I or and Seven, because I like the fact they never show you Nicolas Cage, so I have no idea what
Mhm.
to expect. And if you had to pick somebody that could just go off the rails as a character,
Yeah.
it would probably be him. Well, horror is certainly having a moment. If it's up to Kevin Costner, westerns will also be having a moment. He brought us a Horizon, an American Saga, chapter one. This is the first of four planned chapters in this story, which basically is the multifaceted, multi-character journey of a group of people over a span of 15 years, beginning in 1859, just prior to the Civil War, as they try to settle and expand the West. Because it's the first of four chapters and a real ongoing saga, with the second one, we don't have to wait very long. Our Horizon and American Saga Chapter 2 actually drops August 16th. I think it's the same day as Alien Romulus. So
Hmm.
he really likes to pin himself to horror movies, I guess. But we won't have to wait long. That being said, this first chapter, if you went into it not realizing it was part of a bigger epic saga, you would probably be a little bit confused by the fact there isn't a ton of resolution, or any resolution at all in some cases, for a lot of the different characters and stories you're introduced to. And the film ends with a little bit of an odd kind of 5 minute, what I perceive to be a sizzle reel of things to come, even though they don't exactly make that as clear as I think they should have. Despite that, I enjoyed the journey. I like Kevin Costner. I like Kevin Costner westerns. But did this work for you, Eric?
Kind of. It is really hard for me to get invested in a Western. Someone once pointed out to me that they are sort of nostalgic for a time that people think of like the American dream and pioneers and people, working by their bootstraps from the dirt to build something. And it's just so not true and reflective of our modern day society and us being this big megalopolis powerhouse of the world and all that. Like it just feels like a bizarre fantasy sometimes to me. But even though this is fictional and is not based on a technically true story, this movie manages to have like the grit and the sort of gunslinging and boots on the ground kind of feel that I want from a Western. And I am incredibly invested in so many of the characters that when something more interesting starts happening, I'm very much going to be into that. I really enjoyed the first hour of this movie where Kevin Costner is directing his son. Kevin Costner's not in the movie yet. He's not in it for a full hour, folks. But this settlement of these people who built this place on Horizon and the ensuing attack from the Apache and the sort of split between tribes that did and didn't agree with them being there, and that sort of divide on the other settlers that come to rescue them on they should or should not have built their property on this land. And I feel like it raises a lot of questions and it kickstarts a lot of relationships going in an interesting direction. But oddly, the thing I cared about the least, even though it was done fairly well, was Kevin Costner's whole story, or what ended up being his story. Jenna Malone kickstarts the movie trying to rescue a child and take the child with her, and which Sam, the baby's name, I think so. Yeah, so she takes the child and she goes to live with Michael Angarano, who I haven't seen him in forever. I was super excited to see him, and for the bit that he's in the movie, and it turns into this sort of thing where I'm not entirely sure what happened to Jenna Malone. I might have missed something.
I don't think they've shown us yet. That was one of the things. I mean, that she ends up. I just don't think we've seen the last of her.
Right, like she's been taken back to that guy or whatever. But
yeah.
but yeah, it turns into Kevin Costner and Marigold.
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, Mary
Abby
with
Lee.
the baby. And so neither of them are parents of the baby. And they're together for a while, but it's not like it's a long-term relationship. And then the baby is just left with some immigrants. And then he's on his own. And it just kind of fritters away where there are people who are after Kevin Costner, kind of, but we didn't pay attention to it. And now it's like, who knows what'll happen? And to spend so much time on that plot line, I don't know how I would do it different, because I can't say, because I haven't seen parts 2, 3, or 4. And that's really the big thing. It feels really weird to be reviewing this movie because it is so much not over. I feel like I can't.
It's almost as long as it was. It's pretty much a first act.
Yeah,
and that's how. I likened it in our pre-show discussion to Lonesome Dove, where you have, this used to be a classic version of storytelling, or even something like Stephen King's The Stand. You have 4 essentially films that are all part of a mini series but when you used to do them on TV, they'd air either once a week for 4 weeks, or in the case of The Stand, it was over 4 consecutive nights, but each night was its own. And there are highs and lows of each of the parts, but the sum of the whole ends up being greater than any of the parts. I give this a thumb up because I liked the production and where they're going and the idea, but there are so many things that we haven't even got to, like the question of who is printing these things and why. In the 5-minute kind of flash forward, you get a glimpse of Giovanni Ribisi as that character of who's making them, but we haven't even had time to get to it. All you've had is like Danny Houston and Sam Worthington as these cavalry officers who is making this lie and sending it to these people and trying to draw all these people here. You just know that there are all these disparate groups now that have basically seen this and are making their way there. Eventually Kevin Costner's character is going to make his way there because he's seen the thing. That's where Marigold went because she saw that wagon train that's out, that's
Yeah,
still to the west of them. They are coming because they
led by Luke Wilson,
led by Luke
who
Wilson,
kind of
Will
stole the movie for
Patton.
me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stories, and we get very little to any of closure there. There wasn't going to be closure really.
Right.
A good chapter will end with something being somewhat resolved, and that's why, like, if this movie would have ended where the real plot of this movie ends, which is the when that group that is hunting Apache make their move
Yeah.
and take out a
The
camp. After that
final
point, everything
sequence.
after that, where you just have music and you have like 5 minutes, because that part I know that was really, I knew I sensed what they were doing from the way it was being put together and how quickly you were chewing through time. I'm like, the way that this movie has been plotted and paced for 2 hours and 50 minutes does not suggest they're going to burn through all
Yeah.
this plot in 2 minutes of flash. They're showing you what's to come, but it's not like a real, there's, it fades to black for a minute and then brings that up. But I think they would have been better served to make more clear this is what's coming
Yeah,
for
just
you.
say like end of chapter 1, like, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't honestly know if it was necessary uh to include a sizzle reel. You could do something like what the Avengers have always done, or what Marvel has always done, saying will return in,
Mm,
you know, or one of those movies where they knew Avengers was coming. They even did an early credit block and jumped and said they will return in, and then showed you a couple of scenes from the movie. I just think if they would have cleaned that ending up a little bit more, it would have been more clear what they were doing.
yeah.
But I mean, you see several like pretty prominent actors appear in that haven't appeared anywhere else, and you see a whole bunch of different settings, and so you have an idea. I I'm like you, I'm not sure, was that just showing us what's coming in the very next chapter? Is that pieces out of all the chapters? I have not seen chapter 3 and 4 with a defined release date yet.
Right.
2 is coming out August 16th, so it's
Mhm.
should be done. I have not seen.
Supposedly they're gonna be 4 to 6 months apart, but then chapters 1 and 2 are only 2 months apart, so I don't know when that was said or when that's how that's changed, so.
Yeah, but I enjoyed it, and I'm trying to see now if it tells
Yeah,
you
for
where.
3 hours and a movie that doesn't end and you're sitting there waiting to see where it's going, it is remarkably well paced. Like, I don't feel like it's lagging at any point in the movie. Like, I feel like there's really solid breaks of story beats where this moment is over and this moment's over, and it kind of moves steadily along. It's slower paced. It's a Western, but yeah, I didn't feel like it was a slog of 3 hours to get through. I just feel like it's so not over. It's like, why?
Yeah, and I mean, that's really, and I'm sure there's characters we get introduced to that are going to pop up that we hardly saw, like the priest who, or a priest, some kind of clergyman who, at the very beginning, kind of finds the dead family and plants the 3 crosses. You only really see him in that opening sequence. I have a feeling he'll come back at some point, or we'll see a
I
continuation.
Yeah, I got a feeling he's a certain type of character, and I know that this is gonna be really weird. I don't even know if you're gonna know. I assume because you watch so much. Tom Waits in The Dead Don't Die, or I can't think of another example off the top of my head, but there's every once in a while there are these like storyteller background characters that feel like they're the point of view and maybe the person telling the story to you. And that's the vibe I got from that scene is this person just kind of like, whoa, outside knowledge, like I'm burying this family and I kind of know what's going on. And then we get into things. And I feel like if he comes back in each chapter, it's just like on the fringes, doing something, kind of cleaning up after the mess of whatever's going on. I don't know. I like that vibe a little bit, but
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. I'm glad we're getting the second part pretty soon. I just looked on IMDb, and they show the third part as still being in production. So maybe it'll be. I don't know if they're going to try to do 2 this year, 2 next year, maybe.
maybe.
But it was fun. It was interesting. Obviously, a big passion
I'm on board
project for Kevin Costner.
for decades, like so long. Apparently, part of the reason we're finally getting him now is because he's like, please, I want to see these movies on screen before I die. Like, and also before
He needs to do them before he's too
road.
old. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, so he is clearly extremely passionate about this. I still can't see why, but I feel like it is big and is going somewhere, and I feel like it will be worth it as we move forward.
And it'll be easier to properly analyze how we feel about this once we've seen more of the story play out too. But I thought it was a good introduction. I feel bad for the people that thought they were going in to see one complete movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it says chapter 1 at the beginning of the movie and on the posters. So,
like, people don't read.
I know.
People don't read.
Yeah.
Well, that'll do it for this week and the month of June. We will be back next week looking at July. Starts off on an interesting note. We're getting Despicable Me Part 4, the Winter Soldier version of the Minions, or the Super Soldier version of the Minions. That we never asked for and really probably never needed. And Maxine, the completion of T.I. West's horror trilogy. I don't know if it has because they don't all have an X in them either.
No, but it's MAXXXINE.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's there because of her profession.
Yeah, but still, I'm gonna call the name what it's called. I called Mithrigan. I call Fanforstick, and I'm gonna call this Maxixine. That's the name of the movie.
I don't know what to make of that, so it'll be an interesting discussion next week. But that'll be something to look forward to. Until then, we hope you guys have a wonderful and safe 4th of July. And we will see you next Sunday for, the double header that nobody asked for, a beautiful children's film and a hardcore horror film.
Which one's which?
I guess we'll find out. Until next week, we'll see you at the movie.